Welcome inside another edition of SVG's On the Gridiron series. Brandon Costa from Sports Video Group. Happy to be here with you, taking you behind the scenes at one of the most unique, perhaps the most unique season in the history of the National Football League, certainly as it pertains to a lot of the people who are doing fantastic work behind the scenes in the worlds of video and content production. We're joined by one of those fine individuals now. We're pleased to be talking to David Schindler. He is Senior Director and Executive Producer of Event Presentation and Production for the Tennessee Titans. David, it's a pleasure to see you, sir. Hope you and everyone at the team are doing well right now.
Yeah, we're surviving. It's a unique week. It's a unique season and a unique week for us. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, certainly wishing you guys nothing but the best with everything going on right now. So with some of the home games that you have been able to play, take us inside Nissan Stadium right now. What are the safety protocols looking like as it pertains to you and your team? In the practice facility, in the stadium, what challenges has all of this created, and how on game day specifically have you and your team overcome
it? As close to a normal game that you can get to, obviously not 70,000 fans, but we were preparing as if it were. Our first game was no fans, and we really treated that most like a dress rehearsal for the most part, as much we could. We weren't running a ton of features or things because our football operations really did not want that, and it seemed to not make a lot of sense to be doing, fan contests with no fans in the building or even video features. So it was fairly limited, but from a get the rust out, replays, shooting the game, graphics, we were trying to emulate a game to make it sort of our dress rehearsal.
So how did you have to prepare your team? I mean, was that week one a challenge as far as letting people know where they could and couldn't go? Were you able to have team meetings, or was everything over comms? How did you manage your team in that regard?
So this whole summer, like I think most people, we've gone to a virtual environment. Most people are working at home. When the COVID outbreak hit in mid-March, we had to make some decisions of how we were going to work. We didn't know how long it would be, but we've pretty much become a remote operation. We use Sony C as a cloud server that basically holds all of our content. So the way we work is any content that we produce, whether it is at one of our facilities or out in the community producing pieces, everything gets uploaded to the Sony C server, and then all of our editors are then editing remotely from their home for the most part. So, and then obviously meetings are happening, on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. That's really become the norm. The past couple months since training camp started, there are office hours, so occasionally you get together, socially distanced, of course. We are producing some broadcast shows now, so we are coming to the control room at the stadium or even at the practice facility and producing content, but it's a much scaled down staff. Masks, obviously, I'm in a room by myself, the door is closed, so that's why I'm not wearing my mask at the moment. But anytime you are out with people, you are wearing masks, you're washing your hands, you're abiding by all the rules. Our control room on game day has plexiglass dividers in between stations, so everybody is distanced that way, wearing a mask. So we're abiding by all the rules. Communication is crazy. Before you have your crew list, you submit it, everybody has their credentials. Now you have tier systems. So you have a select group of people who can have access to the field, a very small group of people. Those people have to be tested. Anybody who goes on the field. So if we have cryo or screens that come out for our pregame show, those people have to get tested, come in a day or two before to do all of that. So it is a lot more planning than we had to do before. Between us and the stadium operations staff, there's just a lot more logistics that you always took for granted in the past, but more difficult today.
Yeah. The common theme for a lot of people we're talking to is just expect everything to take a lot longer and just kind of either plan for that or just be okay with that, right?
Yeah, and even when we had, for our first game, we had no fans. You have some things that you never even think of. that the timing of things that you think would be fine are not. So we had one example, we had planned, talked to my general manager for our introductions. We're not planning on doing individual players. He had told me earlier in the week, we're going to have our whole team come out. And then normally we would do a 12th Titan celebration where we honor somebody. The decision was made not to do that for no fans, but literally an hour before the game, found out that the team wanted the individual introductions. So we had to switch gears and introduce our defensive starters. And then you have a little bit of time, but normally we would have our 12th Titan ceremony, and then everybody knows you have the 12th Titan ceremony, then the team gets in line for the anthem, and you do the anthem. Well, we didn't have that, and then so it was time for the anthem, and you have to hit your timing for the anthem at a very specific time.
Sure.
So things that you would take for granted normally, you just sort of, we didn't even think about that.
Right. Yeah, wild. All right, so let's get away from some of the frustrating logistical stuff and talk fun stuff like the content that you guys have been producing.
Sure.
Wild off season with, I don't know how long you guys had to work from home before you could ever get back into your practice facility or your regular facilities of whether you're used to working in. But this was still an off season where there's a lot of excitement around this team right now. It's coming off an AFC title game appearance. You've got Derrick Henry, you got Ryan Tannehill, you got an exciting coach. So I have to imagine it felt like a bummer to not have those tactile touch points of training camp and preseason games where you could really build that hype. How did you turn towards digital and even social content and use technologies and platforms like that to try to, in some way, make up for those opportunities to build the hype coming into this season, which so far is panning out? Team's off to a great start.
Yeah, you still have the stories to tell. You still have a draft. You still have free agency. And you actually have a void, in those months of, March through June, you're trying to figure out what's appropriate content to run. Do fans want to be talking about football? Is it appropriate, or are you missing the mark? So we had a lot of conversations about that. And then you add on top of that, everything in the world that's going on with social justice. So you have different stories to tell and different priorities. So the first thing, really is the draft in April. You don't have draft parties, so you have virtual draft parties. So very quickly, you go to a virtual environment. You have to figure out how are you producing the content. Like I said earlier, we figured out we started using Sony C as a place for all of our content. So we now have a system of how to have a virtual editing suite, as it were. And then it's, what is that content? So virtual draft party. So the hour before the draft, we have a big event, a virtual event where we had guests. We have alumni players. We have it hosted by Eddie George and our in-game host. We bring in celebrities. We bring in musicians. And we have a show, and we use social media. I think we used Tagboard to help with our social media on that end. And just, these are things that you have to learn, and you're planning in a couple of weeks. You're putting a whole show together and learning skill sets you never really had before. So it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, but sometimes it brings out the best in you. Like that draft party that we put together was pretty cool. It was pretty cool having Hollywood actors and alumni players and coming in every 10 minutes in conversations and integrating your hosts. So it was pretty neat. And then you have things like we had right before COVID broke out, we had a tornado. So it started out fantastic. So we have a tornado, we go out and start helping in the community, and we start telling that story of how we're out there in the community, helping people there. And then you get COVID. And then we switch our marketing campaign. We were talking about what we were doing coming off of our great season last year. And it became apparent we should focus on the toughness of our city, of what we're going through. So we ended up going to a campaign called Tennessee Tough, which seemed to really fit in with this year and the makeup of our team. So we started producing content around that. And then you have, again, the social justice issues. after the George Floyd incident, it became important for our players and our coaching staff to do something around that. So we produced a piece that I'm really proud of about social justice. We got a bunch of players to go to Fisk University, which is one of the birthplaces of the social rights movement in Nashville. So it was a great place to do that. It was headed up by our general manager and our coach. And it's one of the pieces I'm really proud of that we put out as an organization. So would welcome fans to take a look at that and the kind of work that we're doing in the off season. And then we're like, okay, should we be telling our football story? So we actually started doing a TV show every week in the month of June. Once a week, we put together a virtual Titans All Access show. So it was really a virtual show, Zoom based, like you're watching now, interviews and some other types of features, interviewing coaches from our draft picks, doing stories on that, doing pieces on our fans. We had a fan zone piece. So our in-game host, Lance Smith, interviews fans from Nashville and some of our fans from around the world, doing pieces on them. So you're just trying to tell all different kinds of stories in different ways, not being able to really be out in the Nashville community all that much to do that and telling those the traditional football stories.
Sure.
And then training camp comes around and then you have to figure that out. So we had our window for our training camp, and then our staff, we all became tier 2 staff for 1 week. And that became, so we could have access to our players for a few days at the beginning of August. We all went through daily testing, and we were able to have our video and our photo shoots and 20 minutes with every player. And we were able to put together as much content as we could capture throughout the season. So it's a lot of stuff. And, even today, we have 3 weekly TV shows that we have to do differently, where you have players who have their particular studio that they can go into. We have a PTZ camera in there. And then we're literally at the stadium, at the control room at Nissan Stadium, 4 miles away. And we're having interviews in different places. So we just have a lot going on, different ways of producing this content.
Wow. So I'm curious, just to follow up on one of those points, when you had that, 4 or 5 days where you had the tier 2 access, what were those conversations like when you sit down where it's like, guys, this might be our shot for the whole year? How'd you prioritize? How'd you, get out the napkins and prioritize? All right, this is what we're going to get out of Derek for 20 minutes,
Well, it's not, in that case, it's not unlike a normal year, because even in a normal year, that media day, you still only have limited time.
Sure.
Right. But to your point, you don't know how much more you're going to get the rest of the season. So you're really just trying to focus in on what are the things we can do this year. We have 3 TV shows. So what are the TV show features, the personality-based pieces that we can get and we can capture in a short amount of time? What are the social hype types of things that we can capture with those players in that time? So we have a couple of sets. The real challenge was we didn't have any place to go. We had to use our facility. Last year we went to a sound stage where we could take them in a bus, go off campus, bring it back. We couldn't do that this year. So we had to use our very small studio to the best of our ability to put something together. But, you're really brainstorming as a group of what is that content? What are those ideas that you can get? And you're really one player at a time as opposed to multiple players together because of social distancing and such.
Right.
So in some ways it was very similar, but in other ways it was more of a challenge.
Sure. I'm sure it's been difficult in not having the chance to really look back and reflect yet, because it's been such a weird year of just kind of figure it out, go. But have you had the chance in your head to kind of think about the dichotomy of like, all right, what are we doing because this is the only way we could do it, versus, this is something that might actually stick, that we actually discovered something that we would not have tried before, And you know what? Even when we do, fingers crossed, get fans back in the building, we might keep doing that. Have you come across any of those things?
So there's a couple things. So the whole virtual interview, and then even user-generated content and content that you can capture on these lovely devices. You know, years ago, you would never do any of that. Everything had to be shot beautifully with very expensive cameras, and it's become the norm. People have accept now Zoom conversations, cell phone video, but then you can find ways, and the quality of cell phones today now are such that you can make some pretty nice looking content that way. So there are certainly things that conversations you can have, remote conversations, that before you may have not done because it didn't look as broadcasty and professional as you felt it should. That now it's like, you know what, the content you can grab from that is not only acceptable, but it allows you access in ways that you wouldn't before. And then there's just thinking outside the box that can lead to some cool things. So in one case, our video open, I think, is a great example of that. We didn't know when we were in the planning stages if we would have any access to players or if we would have fans in the building or anything, but we still wanted to plan as if we were, and to create a great open for our fans, even if it was an online open, as it were. So we started thinking, conceptually, what can we do? And then B, what can we do if we don't have access to those players? So we've been collaborating with the Famous Group for a few years on our open. I have a long relationship with them. We started going back and forth on concepts, and we came up with sort of this fly-through Tennessee macro to micro concept using drones. That was a pretty cool piece. And the initial concept was to really utilize those players, that you fly around the city, but then you also go in and then you land in the weight room, or you land in a back alley where the guys are working out or doing different things. And then as we planned it out, we said, you know what, let's make this a longer campaign where we don't know exactly what the scenario is. Let's plan, and this year, let's do a piece where we aren't counting on getting players to shoot it, because if we don't know if we're going to have access. And then year two, we'll expand the concept, and then we'll get those players in that shoot. So if you take a look at our open, we don't have any players from that we shot for that specifically. We use highlights, but the shoot was really this great shoot with drones around the city. That's, I think, a pretty special piece that I don't know if we would have gotten there if it wasn't for this scenario. We probably would have had, we would have stayed in the traditional mindset of you got to do a player shoot for your open.
Right.
And I think it led to almost a cooler piece of creative as a result.
Yeah, and it fits in with the Tennessee Tough branding too, I'm sure. I imagine getting a lot of those scenics. All right, David, you've been very generous with your time. One last one for you, and maybe this is the hardest and most unfair one, because everyone's always afraid to leave someone out. But it takes a lot of fine people in order to get through everything that you guys have had to overcome throughout this year, and certainly with the start of the season. Throw out some bouquets to some members of your team. Who has helped make this possible technologically, creatively, to keep the Tennessee Titans and your team not only floating, but doing exceptionally well with the work that you're putting together?
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, it's actually not that hard.
Okay, good.
Because I don't have a huge staff. We really have 7 people in addition to me in the full-time staff right now. So that's a lot of work for a small group of people when you consider the amount of content that we're putting out and is expected of our team. So Brian Myers is our technical guru who has really gotten us through how we have done this whole virtual scenario. Mike Duell, Bill Flanagan, Todd Gray, Ashley Farrell, Matt Unger, and Steve Wysinski. That's my staff.
There you go.
That is my full-time staff. Spencer Fritz also is our part-time staff who helps out with our TV shows as well. I wouldn't want to miss him.
Mhm.
We have lots of other people in the organization I could give shout outs to, but the people I just mentioned are the core team that is just churning out the content and figuring out how we do all of this.
For sure. Yeah, kudos to all of them, and certainly kudos to you. He is David Schindler. He is Senior Director, Executive Producer of Event Presentation and Production for the Tennessee Titans, doing a fantastic job with the team there at Nissan Stadium. David, I know this has been a weird week. We hope you and the club can get back on the field very soon, and when you do, welcome fans back to Nissan Stadium. We wish you and the team nothing but the best of luck going forward. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. For more of SVG's On the Gridiron series, you can head on over to sportsvideo.org for the complete list of interviews.